Hi, I'm Chris Stanton. I'm a professor at Harvard Business School. I teach entrepreneurial management. As a result, I frequently have students come into my office to compare two job offers. Job offer one is a job offer from an early stage startup that is offering, say, 10% of the firm and a relatively low salary, and job offer two might be something that looks more traditional with a higher salary, but essentially no equity in the firm. And the question today is, how do you think about what the value of that equity in the firm is for someone thinking about joining an early stage startup? There are three ingredients that I'll talk to you about. The first is dilution. The second is the probability of failure. And the third is liquidity or time before value is going to be realized. Why don't we start with dilution? So suppose that the founder of the firm is telling you, a joiner, that you can join with the founder at the pre-seed stage or before the first money is raised, and you'll be offered 10% of the firm. So what is that 10% of the firm going to look like over time? Well, what I have on the board is that your share starts out at 10% of the firm. Now, the founder believes that the firm is going to be worth quite a lot of money over time, but that value is not going to be realized until outside investors put money into the firm. And as a result of putting that outside money into the firm, your share is going to be diluted. And so this figure just walks you through 3 rounds of investment, where in the seed round, the post-money valuation is $10 million after a $2.5 million investment, which means that your original 10% share is now only 7.5% of the total outstanding equity in the firm. Things continue moving along. The firm raises a Series A. The investment amount is $5 million. The investors believe the post-money valuation after they've put their $5 million in is $25 million. You're again diluted, and your share after this next round of investment is only 5.25% of the total equity in the firm. You can do this again in Series B, and $25 million of investment and $100 million post-money valuation later, your share of the equity is about 4%. So what's happening here? Well, your share is getting smaller, but the pie is growing. So while the founder may believe that the ultimate value of the firm might be $100 million or $500 million, your share of that $500 million or $100 million is getting smaller over time because of dilution. And this is one of the factors that is important to take into account when thinking about what the value of your equity in a startup might be. What determines dilution? Well, outside investment. And you can see that the capital needs for the firm, or the amount of investment, will determine how much you're diluted. So if you're in a very asset-light business that has positive cash flow from the beginning, this investment amount may not be so big, and you may not be diluted quite as much. So that's one thing to take into account. But when a founder offers a joiner or offers you 10% of the early stage equity, you need to take into account that that equity is going to be less than 10% of what was promised after outside investors take a piece of the firm. The second bit of this puzzle is just the probability of success. So if we start with 100 firms that raise seed money, our research shows that clearly not all of these firms are going to be successful. And so if you take into account what the probability of success is, that's going to enable you to think about some central tendency for what the average valuation is going to be once you've taken into account dilution. If 100 firms receive seed money, in the data it looks like fewer than 10 of these 100 firms will exit at the seed round above the value of the capital that is invested. So this is about 8 total firms that will exit. Many of the firms at this stage are also going to end up failing without receiving future capital from Series A investors. In our data, about 40 firms are going to go on to receive Series A investment, which means that 8 firms have exited, 40 firms go on to get future investment, and so over half of the firms here have failed at the seed round. Of these 40 firms that move on to get Series A investment, our data show that about 4 firms will have a successful exit. And of these 40 that move into Series A, about 25 total firms will raise Series B investment. Of these 25 firms, about 3 will have a successful exit, and then the 25 that enter will go on to either die or raise future investment. What this shows you is the probability of success or failure in the data. We can't tell you what the probability of success or failure is for your individual firm or your individual situation, but on average, about 70% of the firms that we start off with in the seed round are going to exit at 0. As a result, doing the probability weighting here is going to be important to try and determine what the expected value of this equity that you started out with is. The third factor is time. Although the equity that you have might look valuable on paper, you won't be able to realize the value of that equity until these exit events occur. As a result, Series B investment may not be realized until 3 to 5 years after the founding of the firm or after your equity grant, and so there will be a period of illiquidity where you won't be able to access the value of that capital. As a result, taking into account the time between when your equity is granted and an exit event or a liquidity event is going to change the value of how you might be thinking about these shares, simply because of the present value of money today is greater than the value of money in the future. So there's a lot of variability, but the 3 lessons to take away are dilution, factoring in the probability of success, and factoring in the time upon which value might be realized by someone who is joining a firm. So we've started with a dream that the founder promised you 10% of a $100 million company or $10 million. How does that look after we account for all of these factors? Well, after dilution in Series B, $100 million post-money valuation and 4% of the fully diluted shares means that your $10 million dream is worth about 4. Now, the next factor that we need to consider is the probability of success and when exits are going to be realized. 25% of the firms that we started out with have made it to this Series B point, and so that 4% is now, that 4% of 100 million is now actually an expectation worth about 1 million. But of these 25 firms, only 3 are going to exit here. The rest are going to continue on to raise additional capital and to potentially fail or exit at the same rate. And so if you put all of these factors together, it looks like the equity is going to be worth, in this example, somewhere around $500,000. And depending on your discount rate and when you see that money in the future, you can get a rough ballpark sense of what that equity might be worth. This is obviously going to be riskier than taking a straight salary, but depending on your expectation, it might be worth it to forego something for the value of this equity 5 to 7 to 8 years down the line. So let's try to put all of this together, because many of the things that we've told you depend on unknown parameters. What do we know from the data? That you will have about 7 years from seed to liquidity on average, with some range around there. But use 7 as a baseline rule of thumb. 25% dilution per round. 4 rounds of capital before successful exit, and the probability of success is about 25% from beginning to end. So if you take the highest value that you might think about for the company, say that's $100 million, if you put all of this together, adding this up means that your original 10% equity stake of the $100 million firm is actually going to be worth about $750,000 7 years down the line. But if you use these numbers and you assess what the likely value of your firm is going to be, you can use this as a benchmark or to plug and play. But obviously these are only averages. Your task is to find a company that is going to beat the average.